So America's dad, Bernie Sanders, released a sweeping criminal justice reform plan. There's really no other way to describe this, but awesome. Now, there's a handful of parts of the bill that I'm not necessarily on board with, that I'm a little torn on, but I agree with 95% of it, and it's so incredibly bold that I have no choice but to support it. So let's go through it here. First and foremost, end cash bail and civil asset forfeiture. Let me breeze through it and then we'll go back and talk about them. Ban for-profit prisons, increase the number of public defenders and funding to better serve certain communities, provide more support for law enforcement and unarmed non-law enforcement as an alternative response system for mental health emergencies, ban the use of facial recognition software in policing, conduct a U.S. Attorney General's investigation whenever someone is killed in police custody, create a prisoner bill of rights for incarcerated people that would end solitary confinement and guarantee living wages, educational training, and the right to vote. End mandatory sentencing minimums and 3 strikes laws. Abolish the death penalty. Legalize marijuana. Stop the criminalization of homelessness and spend more than $25 billion over 5 years to end homelessness. And overall, ultimately, the goal is to reduce the prison population by about 50%. So it's, the idea is, let's get all the nonviolent drug offenders and the nonviolent offenders out of prison because they're not really criminals. So let's stop pretending like they are, and let's do the right thing here and give people their freedom back. So that's awesome, and that's incredibly bold. I mean, a major presidential candidate saying reduce the prison population by about half and giving these hard-hitting, really strong proposals that have really not been allowed in the national conversation for a long time. I mean, this is total shifting the Overton window type stuff here, and that's what Bernie does best. So now let's go through them and get a little bit more specific. When it comes to end cash bail and civil asset forfeiture, it's a no-brainer to me. So cash bail is really, if you think about it, the whole point of that system is, let's bias the criminal justice system in favor of the rich. Because who can afford bail? Wealthy people. Who can't afford it? Poor people. So that's like, it's baked into the cake of the system. So if you really believe that justice is blind, and you really believe that, we should treat everybody equally under the law, well, then you can't have a system that just so brazenly makes it worse for poor folks and better for rich folks. So ending cash bail is huge. Civil asset forfeiture is also just gigantic to end that. I refer to that as legalized robbery by cop, because that's exactly what it is. They're allowed to say, hey, I think you're about to use your property and your cash in an illegal activity. Like, I'm just going to assume that you're about to do a drug deal. So I'm going to just confiscate everything you have. I'm going to take your car. I'm going to take the $6,000 you got in the glove box, and I'm going to flip the burden of proof and say, you can't even get this back. There's not even going to be a clear process set up for you to get this back. So it really is flipping due process on its head and legalizing robbery by cop to the point where more property is taken through civil asset forfeiture every year than is taken through burglary, which is a hard thing to wrap your mind around. That's like saying legalized robbery is a bigger problem than robbery. So the cops do it, but since they're wearing uniforms and a badge, they think it's totally cool. So again, no-brainer. Bernie's 100% correct. Banning for-profit prisons. Oh my God, don't even get me started. This one's easy. This is a layup. I mean, when we talk about certain things that should be off the table in a civilized society, away from the profit motive, probably thing number 1 on that list. Well, actually, I'd argue healthcare is number 1 on that list, but right in the top 5 there is prisons. Because what you're doing when you have private for-profit prisons is you're setting up an incentive in the system. And that incentive is, hey, you'll make more money if you lock up more people. So what happens? The lobbyists for the for-profit prison industry go and give money to politicians and give them campaign contributions and say, hey, listen, this is a business model for us here. We need more asses and more beds. So maybe pass a 3 strikes law. So if somebody commits 3 felonies, no matter how minor the offenses are, they go to jail for life. So it's just a perverse incentive structure where you have, you make it profitable literally for people to be locked up. So you're going to have, this movement towards getting more things illegal and locking people up for more and more frivolous reasons. And that's what we've seen. And on top of that, the conditions in the for-profit prisons, it's been proven that they're disastrous. I mean, I remember covering stories years ago about how the food was tainted and it was old and it was moldy and there were rats where they stored the food and they didn't care. They didn't care, and they'd rather just serve the inmates that shitty food, to make an extra buck than buy new food. And they were able to get away with it because it was the nature of the system. It's a for-profit prison system. So banning those again is a no-brainer. Increasing the number of public defenders and funding to better serve downtrodden communities. I mean, that's a wonderful thing. Public defenders have a reputation of generally being pretty shitty. I guess the idea is to make them better. Provide more support for law enforcement and unarmed non-law enforcement as an alternative response system for mental health emergencies. I guess the idea behind that is, hey, let's not immediately rush towards pulling out our weapons and assuming nefarious malintent at every turn. Let's retrain officers and make it so that there's more de-escalation tactics, particularly when it comes to a mental health crisis. Let's actually set up a system where mental health is addressed and not just flat out criminalized. Because there's a lot of people, particularly who are homeless, who are on the street, and it's all because they have severe mental health issues, but they're treated more as, nefarious criminals than people who need help, and Bernie's trying to change that game. Banning the use of facial recognition software in policing. I mean, this is a little bit of, you see the writing on the wall, you see what's going to happen in the future, some 1984-like stuff, and he's like, well, let's just nip this in the bud. I don't know if it's possible to put that genie back in that bottle, but at least Bernie's trying. Conduct a U.S. Attorney General investigation whenever someone is killed in police custody. This is something that's been talked about for a long time in left-wing circles. The idea that every time you have a police officer who kills, usually some unarmed black kid, they go, oh, no, it's cool, bro. We're just going to do an internal investigation over here. Internal investigation? So that means Bob is going to investigate Jerry, and Bob and Jerry usually watch the Super Bowl together and their families hang out. So what do you think is going to happen? You think the police department is going to internally investigate themselves and go, you know what? This was murder and we must take action. No, not going to happen. They're going to look out for their own. So the idea is you should have, a special prosecutor, a special investigation. The federal government should step in anytime this happens. And this way you have at least some semblance of independence and objectivity where you might actually get people searching for the right answer. So, that, I think, is incredibly important. Creating a prisoner's bill of rights for incarcerated people. I mean, that's important, too, because, it really is the case that once people get locked up for a crime, no matter how minor the crime might be, there's this mindset that's pervasive in society where we go, well, whatever, they deserve whatever's coming to them because they're criminals. And that is certainly not the way that Bernie Sanders thinks, and he thinks there should be some basic human rights that are provided and that the government must abide by. And that would include ending solitary confinement. So I think that's a wonderful thing. Paying a living wage. I mean, if they're going to work, yeah, they should get a living wage. Because right now, and this is where all the talk comes about, like literally slavery in our prison system still. They had people, fight California wildfires who were prisoners and they were getting paid like cents per hour. And it's like, well, that's kind of forced labor, isn't it? Like, that's kind of like slavery, isn't it? So if you're going to have them work, yeah, they should be compensated for that work. I mean, because they may have done something terrible in their lives, doesn't mean that then you can treat them as slaves, and that's totally fine. I mean, some people would argue, yeah, I am fine with that, but I would disagree with that. I would say slavery is probably okay under no circumstance. Call me crazy. Ending mandatory minimum sentences and 3 strikes laws. Again, that's a no-brainer. The 3 strikes laws were lobbied for by the private prison industry to try to get more butts and more beds. Mandatory minimum sentences, of course, basically take agency away from the judges to use reason based on an individual case. It's like, no, if they do this, then you have to, at the very least, give them X amount of time in prison. And what they were finding is it was way too punitive, and people were going to prison for a long time when they shouldn't. So this gets rid of that. And also, by the way, we should point out, it's been proven that mandatory minimums have been applied in a racially biased, racist way, where if you have a white person and a black person and they commit the same crime, you would have the black person getting a lot more time in prison. So again, same crime, but one person gets less time, the other person gets more time. So this is a way to try to, chip away at that terrible dynamic and fix it. He says, abolish the death penalty. That's a no-brainer in the sense that at least there was a study that came out a few years back. At least 4% of the people on death row are innocent. So you can never set up a system where you have the death penalty and you always get somebody who's guilty. There's always going to be the chance for some innocent people to slip through the cracks, and 4% is an incredibly high percentage. So since that's the case, I can't have a system where my tax dollars go towards killing innocent people, because that would mean I'm funding murder. So I'm not okay with that. You shouldn't be okay with that either. It makes perfect sense. Some lefties have disagreed with me because what I've said is, in theory, like the idea of somebody who's the most vicious criminal you can imagine somebody who murders and disembowels little children and does it for fun and has done it to 30 kids. I don't go that next lefty step of saying it's equally wrong to kill him back. Well, no, because I think there's a weird argument there for it's kind of defensive in nature from society to get rid of that guy because he's obviously incapable of living in society and not doing something like that. There's obviously some weird thing that's going on where he's almost drawn to do that and he can't not do it. So I don't, in theory, I'd be totally fine with killing that person. But the fact of the matter is, if we have the death penalty, we will also kill people who are innocent, and so that's why I can't have the death penalty. But I'm definitely of the mind that, I don't care, fuck that person. I hate him. So I'm not going to lose sleep if that person gets the death penalty, but I will at the same time argue for systemic change where we do get rid of the death penalty. And again, I know there are some lefties who disagree with me and say, no, you gotta, you should be against it in all cases equally, but that's just not the way I think. But it's okay. Don't worry. Take yes for an answer. I'm still with you on the bigger picture, and I'm still with you in fighting for that policy change because, again, we get innocent people, and that I can't stand and I can't take. Now, also legalize marijuana is part of this. No-brainer. Stop the criminalization of homelessness and spend more than $25 billion over 5 years to end homelessness. This is huge because homelessness is an issue that's not really talked about that much in electoral politics in the U.S., because there's no politicians see it as, oh, there's no benefit for me. I don't get any benefit from this. Homeless people don't vote. So instead, all they'll do is talk about the middle class, the middle class, the middle class, the middle class. And you should talk about the middle class. But you should also talk about homelessness. And you should also talk about poverty. Because these are incredibly serious issues and they need to be addressed. And Bernie's taking that step of saying, no, let's actually fight to try to end homelessness. And it's a bold plan. It's an intelligent plan. I love it. The plan to fight back against the criminalization of homelessness is just as important. They've made it so it's illegal to feed homeless people in certain places. Why? Because they say, oh my God, you're affecting the real estate value of the surrounding houses. Nobody's going to want to buy the house. If this upper middle class person moves, nobody's going to want to buy that house because they know 2 blocks away they're feeding the homeless. So this is Bernie saying, hey, let's stop the criminalization of homelessness. Let's stop those laws where it's like you can't sit on a bench for X amount of hours and the whole idea is to be against homeless people. We could actually address this in a better way, in a more humane way. You don't have to be punitive all the time. You could make it so that we actually care about the humanity of these people and we put a roof over everybody's head. And you also get the benefit of the thing that other people talk about, which is, hey, we need to clean up the streets and we need to make it so that, the place looks attractive. Well, you can achieve that and save money by giving homeless people all a roof over their head. So it's the correct answer from a moral perspective, an ethical perspective, and a fiscal perspective. because studies have shown it saves money when you do that. And then finally, the reducing the prison population by 50%. Bold, strong, intelligent, the best plan by far of anybody. The only thing I said, I still don't know what I think about the issue. What I was referring to there is the voting rights situation while incarcerated. And we had that debate, we had that discussion a while ago when Bernie was asked a trick question and he walked right into the trap. He was, hey, should the Boston Marathon bomber be able to vote while in prison? And he was like, yeah, I think so, yes. And, I did a long segment, hey, here's how Bernie could have answered that question, where he's not, hiding the ball with what his beliefs are, but he's also being a little bit more politically savvy in how he dealt with it, because that was a scandal for 2 or 3 days, and that is not an answer. We looked at the polling, and the American people are like, they don't think that it's a crazy idea to say while they're incarcerated, they cannot vote. Because think about it. When you're locked up, when you're in prison, there are plenty of other, freedoms and rights that you no longer get while you're locked up. That doesn't mean that you'll never get them back. In fact, I would argue vociferously with anybody who says, and some conservatives say, they should forever lose their right to vote. No, definitely not that. But is there a conversation to be had as to what the rule should be? And I think I polled you guys, and I don't remember what the response was, but I think the response was, I think it was like a mixed response where people said, hey, let all of the nonviolent offenders vote while they're in prison and let everybody vote when they're out of prison. But for people who committed murder or terrorism or very serious felony crimes, while they're in prison, it's not a crazy idea to not let them vote. So now, again, listen, the thing about Bernie is even when you might disagree with him, he's going to tell you exactly what he thinks, and he's going to make an argument for it, which is incredibly refreshing. So it is what it is, and that's his belief. But for me personally, I still don't know what I believe on that issue. I lean towards what I think you guys said. My gut reaction tells me that, first and foremost, obviously, everybody should be able to vote once, if you're out of prison. So you serve your time and then you get out 100%, you should be able to vote. It should never be taken away permanently. But while in prison for the worst kind of crimes, I don't think it's an egregious outrage that, you're not allowed to vote if you committed quadruple murder while you're in prison. So that's what I lean towards, but I could be convinced in either direction, and I'm open to hearing arguments in either direction. But either way, minor disagreements I have with Bernie here and there, they're largely irrelevant because I agree with like 95% of the plan, and it is honestly almost the perfect plan. Is this something that's going to get a lot of media attention? No. Because they don't care about policy substance. They don't care about specifics. They don't care about things that would actually fix the country. So this is not like a sexy story of like one of Donald Trump's tweets. So it's not going to get that much press. But that's why you guys are here. Because it's your job to spread the word, just get the information out there as much as humanly possible. Because this is stuff that changes people's minds and makes them want to vote for somebody like Bernie, and they just need to hear about it. You just need to give people that option and let them know that this is on the menu, this is on the table. So once they know that, that's when he starts gaining more and more support. So spread the word, let everybody know that he's swinging for the fences and he's doing a really good job, and this is an awesome plan.